And we're back in the car on a Sunday, like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Sunday late afternoon into early evening here with me in New York. But once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. A movie anniversary, a legendary, iconic film starring a couple of wonderful actors who are no longer with us, one who is, and it is, in my opinion, the best buddy movie ever made. And when we think buddy movies, if you're not familiar, because the phrase isn't used as much as it used to be, in the 80s and 90s, it's generally a story where you have two mismatched people. Often it's cop partners, a la Lethal Weapon, a la 48 Hours, a la Rush Hour, franchise. This movie, alas, was not a franchise, and it's unfortunate because the ingredients were there for a great franchise. But what we're left with is the best film of its kind ever made. Two mismatched people who are not cops. One of them was a former cop, and the other is an accountant who took from the rich to give to the poor. The movie, which opened on this day, July 20th. What's today's date? Is today the 20th or July 20th, 1988, is Martin Brest's sensational action comedy, Midnight Run. The three stars of this film are Oscar winner Robert De Niro, the late great Charles Grodin, and the also late great leap year baby himself, Dennis Farina. Now, Midnight Run is not a film which I saw in theaters, not surprisingly, because I was 14 during the summer of 1988. The only movie I saw that summer was Arnold Schwarzenegger and Jim Belushi's buddy film, Red Heat, which did okay at the box office, but not enough to become a franchise. Now, Midnight Run, the production and marketing budget all told was around 30 million, and it grossed somewhere between 80 and 85 million worldwide. So it was a hit, but it didn't have the traction of a Beverly Hills Cop, another kind of cop buddy movie. Beverly Hills Cop, one of the actors along with Eddie Murphy, John Ashton, who passed not that long ago himself, is involved and heavily involved, has a bigger, more important role, if you will, in Midnight Run. So Robert De Niro, I guess he's considered controversial in some circles, not for his acting, but some of his political stances and stuff. Some people take issue with it. Other people say, way to go, Bobby D. He and Mickey Rourke had beef for I don't even know how many years, and then they seemed to make up. But in that case, the issue with De Niro was that Mickey Rourke thought he acted like a fucking asshole most of the time when they were making Angel. I said, I used to worship this guy. I love this guy. He was my idol, and he treated me like shit. Rourke was almost hurt, and then he was convinced that De Niro had made sure he didn't get cast in The Irishman. That turned out to not be true, and as I said, Rourke made he said a lot of funny shit, Mickey Rourke. We went to see the Bob Dylan film, and he just shredded Timothy Chalamet's performance. He fucking shredded it. Anyway, they made up, and De Niro, at this point in his career in the 80s, he was not known at all for comedy. Nobody knew if he could do comedy, if he could even be mildly entertaining from the comedic perspective. And, Clint Eastwood, who was more than a decade older than De Niro, there were people who didn't think that he could do comedy. And then you have the Any Which Way But Loose movies, which are an absolute riot, and he's funny. What it comes down to is when the audiences identify with you, if they think you can't be funny, you have more latitude. And in the case of Clint, playing opposite an orangutan, right turn Clyde, it turned out to be a brilliant move, because to see alpha male number one, Clint Eastwood, his best friend is a fucking orangutan, right turn Clyde, and people found that funny. But Clint's timing was never an issue. The fact that, he's not Olivier, he's not Brando, he's not Pacino, he's not De Niro, he's not Daniel Day-Lewis, big fucking deal, doesn't mean the guy can't be funny. And Robert De Niro has impeccable timing in general. You look at the way that he pauses, some of the things he does in his most iconic performances, whether it's Raging Bull, whether it's Taxi Driver, which I still say is the single greatest performance given by an actor in the last 50 years. You can give me your Daniel Day-Lewis. Bobby D as Travis Bickle is just, it's beyond anything. So this film is not actually a comedy, but it is what they call an action comedy, because technically 48 Hours, Beverly Hills Cop, not so much Lethal Weapon. People sometimes call Lethal Weapon an action comedy. Lethal Weapon, the plot to me is more serious even than Midnight Run. There are less comedic asides. And 48 Hours, another film, I don't see that film as really that comedic. It's funny because Eddie Murphy, at age 19 going on 20, he ad-libs and he gets laughs there that weren't in the script. Similar to Eddie Murphy in Beverly Hills Cop, he had a couple of bits in that film which weren't in the script. You just, in the immortal words of Clint Eastwood talking about Jim Carrey, just turn the camera on and let's just let the kid go. See, maybe we'll catch lightning in a bottle. But De Niro, it turned out, his timing and the way that he and Grodin interacted. De Niro's often funny because he's not funny, because his character of Jack Walsh is a very serious, sober, straightforward, straight-laced, uncorruptible man. And he is somebody whose life has been destroyed because he was and is incorruptible is the word that I'm looking for. Sorry, uncorruptible is not really a word. I don't think that that's in the dictionary, but the other one is. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So our two principals in this film, Charles Grodin's Jonathan Mardukas, a CPA who is currently on the run. He needs to be brought back. He basically jumped bail. He is somebody who he's a hero. There's no way around it. He's a hero, and more than 90% of people right now would look at what this guy did and say, yes, this man is a hero. He should get a monument named after him. He shouldn't be in prison. So he's an accountant, Jonathan Mardukas, that's played by Charles Grodin, who is just a phenomenal comic actor. I mean, Charles Grodin is one of the greatest to ever do it. He's the sort of performer, whenever he showed up in a movie, you got excited because something great was going to happen. The guy never missed, even in films which really aren't so good. Speaking of Jim Belushi, Taking Care of Business, it's okay. I mean, if you're a fan of baseball, it works a little bit better, especially if you're a fan of the Chicago Cubs. The movie Beethoven with the dog, it was like Marley and Me before Marley and Me. He makes the film watchable. But Grodin plays this CPA. It's a little bit of an angle like The Firm, where Tom Cruise in the adaptation of Grisham's book, he thinks he's working for a legitimate firm, and he's basically a mob lawyer. His firm is a mob-run firm. They're laundering money, etc., etc. Well, 5 years earlier, in Midnight Run, what we get from Jonathan Mardukas, because as the film opens, he's already jumped bail. And it's up to Robert De Niro's ex-Chicago cop, and why are you so unpopular with the Chicago Police Department, Jack? Ex-Chicago cop who's now a bounty hunter. Or, in the following years, Pink Cadillac with Clint Eastwood, the same kind of character is known as a skip tracer, but in this he's known as a bounty hunter. And Joey Pants, Joe Pantoliano, the future Cypher in The Matrix, he plays the bail bondsman who put the bond up for Jonathan Mardukas. But the circumstances behind Mardukas getting busted were that he realized he was not working for a legitimate firm. He was a mob accountant, and there were tens of millions of dollars that were being illegally funneled. When he found out what was going on, as he said, I couldn't do nothing. So he basically drained the accounts, because he had all of the, presumed passwords of the day. He drained the accounts and he donated all the money to worthwhile causes. And he was arrested, as he should have been. He broke the law, but he was praised in most quarters as, this is what we should all aspire to be. A person who had no idea he was breaking the law. He was aiding and abetting hardened criminals, killers, thieves, drug dealers. And he saw what was going on, and he gave them all a gigantic middle-fingered salute. The problem is, though, he jumped bail knowing that if he actually were to appear before a judge, if he were to go into the so-called witness protection program, he's not going to make it into any witness protection program because the whole mob wants him dead. So enter Bobby D as Jack Walsh, the bounty hunter who's tasked with you can find this guy, Jack. Maybe he's in New York, and Jack Walsh does his due diligence, and he finds him. He figures out where Jonathan Mardukas, he's holed up in an apartment in New York, and all he has to do is get him on a plane and get him back to Las Vegas before midnight, I think midnight on Friday, hence the title Midnight Run, and he's days ahead of schedule. But Jonathan Mardukas has no intentions of going quietly. Now, he can't outfight De Niro's Jack Walsh. He's not trained for that. He's an intellectual. And there is a running theme and a running thread of Jack Walsh wanting to open his own coffee shop. He doesn't want to do this anymore. It's beneath him. He was a good cop, and he got run out of the Chicago Police Department. Spoiler alert, the same pieces of shit that Jonathan Mardukas was working for, it's those guys that ran Jack Walsh out of Chicago. Ruined his life. He lost his wife. He basically lost his daughter. And he doesn't have, he's doing work that's, it's just terrible what he's reduced to. But he can make this money, and he doesn't have debts at this point. He wants to open a nice little coffee shop. Now, in a similar twist to the same year's Twins with Arnold Schwarzenegger and Danny DeVito. Now, you got to think this is insane to these two movies, but in that movie, there is the matter of $5 million, as Danny DeVito says, $5 million, almost a little Dr. Evil before Dr. Evil. There's this matter of $5 million, which somehow becomes $4 million. And what happened to the missing million? Well, in the world of Midnight Run, there is an idea that Jonathan Mardukas, he gave $15 million to charity, but no one knows exactly how much money he took. So there is a version of The Matrix, there's a version where he actually has a shit ton of money that he didn't give to charity, that he took for travel expenses for himself, or maybe he was going to give his wife $500,000. We don't know. But this is in the back of our minds as the story plays out. He may have money. And as De Niro's Jack Walsh says, at one point, I know you have money. I don't know if you have money. And what he would mean by that is, I don't know if you're carrying any money on you. You might only have a couple of bucks, like literally you might have $2 in quarters. But I don't believe that you are actually broke. I just don't think that you would leave yourself short. He doesn't verbalize it like that, but this is what we get. So you have the mob. The head of the mob is a guy named Jimmy Serrano, played by the aforementioned leap year baby, Dennis Farina. And by leap year baby, I'm being serious. Dennis Farina, if we just go by his birthday being February 29th, he was 19 years old when he passed, 18 years old, because he only actually celebrated, he would have his birthday on March 1st, most years. But Dennis Farina plays a character called Jimmy Serrano, the mob boss, the guy who was running everything. He was running everything, was going through him and through the business that Mardukas was doing the books for. And so the connection between Jack Walsh and Jonathan Mardukas is something that we as the audience, we don't know early in the story. It's not till it develops. But Jimmy Serrano is a terrifying figure. This is the kind of mob boss that you would expect to see in The Godfather or Goodfellas. This guy is even dirtier. Like, Don Corleone is not above, commissioning or having people killed, or, making threats. I'll make him an offer he won't refuse. Jimmy Serrano doesn't even bother with that. He just doesn't give a fuck. If you cross him, he's going to kill you. And he's not just going to kill you. As he says to Mardukas, I'm going to go out, I'm going to find your wife, and I'm going to kill her too. Like, she had nothing to do with it. He knows she had nothing to do with it. And you're going to be dead already, but I'm going to kill her anyway. Like, that's the kind of personality that Jimmy Serrano is. So when Jack Walsh collars Jonathan Mardukas, it seems pretty straightforward, track him and snatch him, as Clint, as I say, says in Pink Cadillac when he finds Bernadette Peters. But in the world of that movie, there's also a lot of other shit going on. It's not as simple as just pick up this woman and bring her in, because in that film, her ex-husband is in really, really bad stuff. He's involved in this terrible counterfeiting ring with just a gang of horrible, awful people. And he can't just bring her back. He can't, because the crime is going to be pinned on her. The counterfeiting shit is going to be pinned on her, and Clint can't abide by that. Well, in the world of Midnight Run, Jack Walsh has a heart. He has a conscience, despite the rough edges and despite the fact that he legitimately has a terrible temper, and he keeps threatening to beat the shit out of Charles Grodin's Jonathan Mardukas, and he really wants to tune him up. But there is something in the way that De Niro, the pauses and the line readings, that we're waiting for him, where the conscience is going to inform his behavior, that he is going to say, I can't do this, I can't take part in this. I know if I bring this man in, this man who has done more good in his life than the next 100,000 people, I'm going to bring this man in, and within 1 hour, he is going to be executed. There has to be another way. Now, he doesn't verbalize that either, but as we watch the film, and we see the two guys constantly at odds, fighting tooth and nail. Now, what we're presented with is Jack Walsh was a fan of this guy. He loved Jonathan Mardukas, and he even admits it. When I got arrested and you saw what happened, were you on my side? And he said, yeah, I was. He says, well, why aren't you on my side now? Well, you're in my way. You're in my way. If I bring you in, I get my $100,000. I can get out of this miserable fucking business forever. He doesn't exactly say he's sorry, but we can see that he's conflicted and he's struggling. So he's going to do it the easy way, get on a plane and let's go to Vegas. But Mardukas refuses to fly, and that sets forth a crazy madcap series of adventures as Midnight Run, more so than the other buddy films I mentioned. It takes the form of a road movie. It has an almost planes, trains, and automobiles feel for huge chunks, because you have these guys who are low on funds, are desperate. Both guys might get executed by the mob, and Jack Walsh has stolen identification from an FBI agent, so he's going to go to prison for that too. So the noose tightens around these guys, and then you have the John Ashton character of Marvin Dorfler, who is like the backup bounty hunter when it doesn't appear that Jack Walsh, how the fuck did he miss the plane? He called me from the fucking airport. I will say that the scenes on the phone between De Niro and Joe Pantoliano, they are some of the funniest moments in any movie that I've ever witnessed. They are that good. And it isn't easy to have chemistry with somebody over the phone. But William Shatner and Ricardo Montalban had a lot of chemistry in Star Trek II, even though they were never on set together. De Niro and Joey Pants were not on set together, but the chemistry between them is palpable. It feels like they know each other. It just feels like these guys have a history. And the skill is in the acting. The way that they relate, even as they're both just screaming and carrying on at one another. So as the noose begins to tighten around our intrepid heroes, each time it seems as if they're reaching some kind of rapprochement or understanding that I can't bring this guy in. Something goes amiss that causes De Niro to, now I really hate this motherfucker. I don't want to talk to you for the rest of the trip, whatever the case might be. Now, in this movie, there is a very serious action sequence. There's a lot of action sequences in the film, but they are not the kind of high velocity action sequences of a Rush Hour or a Lethal Weapon or even a 48 Hours or Beverly Hills Cop. They're smaller in scale. Like, there is a car chase, it's a helicopter and car chase that, if it's Michael Bay, is not shot this way. It would have added $10 million to the budget. The effects are practical effects, and they're real, and there's some amazing stunt work. So where I was going with that, the characters end up not exactly shooting rapids, but they're in a situation where they're escaping from this chase, and they end up in what amount to rapids. They don't have a boat worth of fuck. They got nothing. And in the world of the film, we see the guys struggling to not drown. And there is a moment, a kind of a trust test, if you will, where De Niro might die, Jack Walsh might die, and Jonathan Mardukas has a legitimate conundrum. I can just leave this motherfucker here. This guy he's going to turn me in. And it's a fantastic scene, the way that it's shot, the way that it's edited, but this isn't really a spoiler. For the heavy stuff, it ended up being stuntmen. Now, you have certain shots of De Niro and Charles Grodin. We see that it's them, but not anything dangerous. It almost looks like they're in a wave pool with some rocks or something like that. So the story goes, and Charles Grodin tells this story in his autobiography. It's one of the highlights. It's one of the highlights of his autobiography. They're getting ready to shoot all of the scenes of the rapids. And De Niro, who was very young and extremely athletic. I mean, Jake LaMotta, he was his trainer said that he could have been a middleweight contender. That's how good De Niro looked in the ring. That's how much of a great athlete this guy was. He didn't just look the part of a middleweight boxer. In a different life, Robert De Niro could have been a boxer. So you're talking about an elite athlete who happens to also be an actor. And they said the same about Robert Redford. Redford was a phenomenal baseball player. So of course he looked like a great baseball player in the natural. So they're getting ready to shoot this scene with stuntmen. But there's something in De Niro's wiring that's saying, I don't know. I think I can do this. I don't know about Chuck. Charles Grodin was always known as Chuck. I don't know about Chuck. But let me give this a go. Let me give this a shot. Maybe you don't have to use stuntmen, and if I can do it, it'll be more believable. He's right. It's like Clint Eastwood in Dirty Harry, refusing to let a stuntman jump off the Larkspur train trestle onto a speeding school bus. No, I can do this, Don. Talking to Don Siegel. So De Niro talks his way into them letting him go into this area, which was, it wasn't deadly, but it could have been dangerous. There were enough currents, and some of the rocks were presumably, it wasn't going to be pleasant if you banged into them at a certain level of speed with the water. So De Niro went into the water, and he tried to do it as it would have been in the script, and he almost drowned. Now, he wasn't in danger of drowning because they only let him in with other divers there and swimmers there that were going to fish him out if there was a problem. But he almost drowned. If they hadn't been there, it was going to be touch and go. So they pulled him out of the water, and De Niro was legitimately embarrassed because he didn't understand why they were wasting their time. Why would I need a stuntman? This doesn't look that difficult. And when they fished him out of the water, nobody wanted to say anything, very intense. Nobody wanted to make fun of him. What all De Niro said was, he's soaking wet and he's heaving. He's trying to get his breath back. And he pointed at Grodin like this and said, I don't recommend Chuck do this shot. I don't recommend Chuck do this shot. So they used the stuntmen and they shot it. And it looks terrific in the film. Yes, there are cutaways for the kind of dangerous portions of the rapids. But the editing, if you didn't know what you were looking at, you wouldn't say, oh, those are definitely stuntmen. It's believable in the world of the film. And because there are so many lighthearted and comedic bits and moments of connection, the further you get into the story, there appear to be more moments of genuine connection between the two leads. That the level of tension that develops in the final act, it's not what you expect. The tension is off the charts. Without spoiling it, there's a confrontation at Vegas McCarran Airport where everybody is converging at the same time, and we have no idea what the heck is going to happen. There's no way to know. And it's really incredibly well directed, acted, and edited by Martin Brest, the filmmaker. He knew exactly how long to hold the shots, and because if you're looking at multiple planes of action within the same general location, there's a lot of ways to do it, and I can't imagine anybody filming that, editing that any better. And there is that moment between De Niro, Jack Walsh, and Dennis Farina's Jimmy Serrano. And these are two guys who have basically been on a collision course since they first came into one another's sphere. And the other part of the backstory is that all of the Chicago police were on the payroll, except Jack Walsh. And they kept going to him. Jimmy Serrano, we're led to believe, didn't want to fight with this guy. Listen, just take a couple of $100 a week. We don't need to be enemies. But he had that white knight mentality. He could not, in good conscience, take any bribes. He couldn't do it. And he was just about to bust the guy when they suspiciously uncovered drugs in his locker and said, we didn't want it to come to this, Jack. either go on the payroll or get the fuck out of town. And obviously we're not going to, they're not intending to prosecute him. They just want to give him the Faustian bargain. So they allowed him to leave town. Just don't ever come back. And so these guys who are and have been on this collision course, they have what amounts to 2 minutes of bullshit conversation where each guy thinks that he's got the other right where he wants him. But we don't know how it's all going to play out because some of it depends on De Niro's wearing a wire, and does the FBI, can they hear him? Is the wire even working? And it is just Olympic levels of tension. Just really amazing sequence. And without spoiling the ending, I remember reading Roger Ebert's review of this film, and Ebert was an enormous fan, absolutely loved it, and he was pleasantly surprised at how versatile and how well De Niro did with comedy, because De Niro was also not known as a guy who would ad-lib. He wasn't known as that kind of a performer, and it was clear that Grodin drew that out of him. He must have adored Grodin, because the two guys, it's like they're riffing off of one another. And what De Niro said is the final scene between them, Grodin is every bit as good as De Niro. He wasn't as good of a dramatic actor, but he finds exactly the right notes to close the show. And his actions are entirely believable. And the running thing with the coffee shop, and what's the story with this guy? Would he really have left himself that short? All of those threads, which are not we're not beaten over the head with it throughout the story, but it's stuff that we might be thinking about as the film approaches, the final moments. And it's such a beautiful scene between them, and, callbacks to earlier in the story, and a real sense of respect formed between these two guys who are on opposite sides, and maybe they'll never be friends, because as Grodin said, maybe we could have been friends, but maybe we would have just, in a different life, maybe we would have just hated each other, who knows? But there is that idea of, we'll see you in the next life, and maybe we will be friends in a next life if there is such a thing. So Midnight Run is streaming on Netflix as we speak. It was one of my dad's all-time favorite films. It might have even been in his top 5. That's how much my father loved this movie. He saw it, I can't even tell you how many times, at least 15 times from start to finish. And I mentioned about franchises. There was a lot of chatter circa 1990 that they were going to make a sequel to Midnight Run, but it just didn't happen. And De Niro in that era was incredibly busy. Go to De Niro's IMDb page and you look at how busy he was between like 1987 and 1997. It's impossible. I don't think the guy ever took a day off. He was just working like crazy. And it's unfortunate that from the franchise perspective that De Niro did a sequel to Analyze This, not good, and Meet the Parents, Meet the Parents Too, Meet the Fockers, whatever, not good. I wish that he had done a sequel to Midnight Run. It wasn't in the cards, but at least we have this one masterpiece, 95% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. That is by far the highest score of any of the even great films such as Lethal Weapon within this kind of subgenre, the action comedy or the one's a movie. One's a cop and one's a killer. One's a cop, one's a crook. The best buddy movie ever made, Midnight Run, released on this day, 1988, directed by Martin Brest and starring Robert De Niro, Charles Grodin, Dennis Farina, John Ashton, Philip Baker Hall, Richard Ferrangi, and the sensational Joey Pants, Joe Pantoliano. This has been episode 585 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all so much for spending some of your Sunday early evening here with me in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Till then,